Welcome, all of you. I hope this microphone works. My name is Arjon Dunnewind. Together with Ine Gevers, I'm one of the two curators of the IMPAKT Festival 2024. Deal with it. And I'm very happy to have a guest here today. This morning, 10 o'clock. Thanks all for coming so early. And that's a guest that has been around at IMPAKT for a long time, like since the early days of IMPAKT. In films and screenings, they have been participating in exhibitions at IMPAKT also. And I'm very happy to have him here now, present, to talk about his work. From the Yes Man, please a warm welcome to Mike Bonnano.
Thank you. Yeah. Aha. I've never used one of these before. Okay. Today, I think this is, it's an artist talk, is that right? Okay. All right. So I thought I'd do two things. I'm going to show you some of my earliest work and how it relates to some recent work. And then I'm also going to put this stuff into a historical context because it doesn't really fit very well into contemporary art. It's actually traditional with deep roots in the mytho-histories of every culture. So we actually, not that long ago, started this thing called the Trickster Academy, which trains people in the arts of being a contemporary trickster. The tricksters being these characters that every country has. And, you know, my mother is Dutch, and the fox is one of the Dutch trickster characters. Also, Reynard the fox. You know, she's from the south, near Maastricht. And so it's, I kind of have found some identification with the fox later in life. I didn't realize it at first. You don't know, and then you find out these days in our contemporary culture. So I urge you all to dig down into your trickster roots, because I think that mischief is a sort of fundamental way that humans communicate and have communicated since the beginnings of humanity. And that is why so many of the stories that we have today are stories of mischief and of people with lesser power defeating those with more, or demigods with lesser power defeating gods, or gods with lesser power defeating other gods with more power. It's about fighting power using agility, cleverness, border crossing, masquerade, those kinds of tactics that are fundamentally mischievous. So first of all, Trickster Academy, as you can see, is represented by this inverted pyramid because it is a pyramid scheme. We're not actually in the Trickster Academy tonight. It's an 11-step program. I'm not going to get into it. I talked about it a little bit last night. One step shy of a 12-step program. You advance from the bottom, the top to the bottom. It's different than the usual pyramid scheme. It's inverted, and you might also call it the Academy for Applied Confucianism because it involves confusion. Confusion is a valuable state. This, the ethos of being a trickster, I think, involves confusing others. And I think confusion is a place where we're open to change, right? If you're confused about something, it means that you're thinking about it. And these days, most of the time, we spend our lives in certainty, knowing our political position, knowing the boundaries and features of reality. And so when we're challenged to think about something a different way, it opens up a space for change. So we rely on confusion, and together we are supposed to outfox those powerful opponents. Tricksters throughout history, we've got all these different characters from different places. It is a universal thing. All cultures have trickster characters in their myths or history. And I say myths or history because a lot of them are mythological, like Anansi, the West African spider character, or you see Tanuki, the raccoon from Japan, the raven from the Pacific Northwest. Many, many indigenous cultures with their mythological characters, their stories. But then also there are tricksters who take a real human form. Whoops. Yeah, we're gonna have a look at that now. This is, yeah. Okay, here we go. This guy, I don't know if you're familiar with this guy, but this is an actual photograph of Jesus, riding a donkey. Why does Jesus ride a donkey? Anybody know? It kind of makes him look like an ass. I mean, literally, it's like a low culture, a kind of pathetic approach. It's symbolic. He doesn't ride in on a donkey for no reason, because, you know, there were horses around. He could have ridden a horse. But you'd only be riding a donkey if you're going out to the fields to gather your crops and then bring them back on the donkey. You'd be walking back. It was weird to ride into town on a donkey. And it was weird so that people would tell the story, retell the story of the weirdness. And they retold it so much that now they're reenacting it somewhere in Middle America in theme parks, you know, a couple thousand years later, which is, it's crazy to think about the power of these stories and these stories of a trickster. And at one point, you know, Jesus here was revolutionary, fighting against the Roman occupation in a place where the fight and the struggles continue. Got a little twisted since then, but there's a trickster that is like hidden in plain sight, right? Hidden in plain sight, because that guy is everywhere now, often looking like that. Nasruddin riding a donkey backwards. I'm not going to get into this, but this is, you know, 1,000 years later, and referring in some ways to the original riding the donkey, doing it differently, confounding, and creating stories of this is like this. This is part of a whole series of Nasruddin stories. And this is also a photograph. I don't know how they get these pictures, but of, you know, from 1,000 years ago. But there you have it. I mean, satire like Jonathan Swift publishing this pamphlet in the what is now the UK. This was in the 1700s. A modest proposal for preventing the children of poor people from being a burden to their parents or country, and for making them beneficial to the public. And so in this pamphlet, he suggests that the Irish should eat their children in order to survive the famines. And it was, again, a political commentary, but it takes a few pages of reading it to realize that it's not serious. It's dark humor. It's satire. And this is a way that we work a lot in this with the Yes Men, is by creating these stories that go a little too far, but follow the logic of whatever violent system already exists. You know, usually for us, it's capitalism or something that a corporation is doing that's bad, and you take it one step further than people are willing to go. And that keeps getting harder to do these days. At the time, of course, the Crown, the English government was starving the Irish. It wasn't really just a case of a famine. It was a case of the Irish not having enough money to pay for the grains that were being exported. So that was what Swift was talking about. So tactics like the suffragettes, I mean, you know, a struggle that was going on for already 100 years, when this photo was taken. And I like to show this photo because it's always, well, at least for me, when we learned about stuff like this, about political struggle when I was in school, we just learned that there were these women who protested. But then the details of it, like we didn't actually learn anything about the violence of the time and about, they wore white, not just because that was the way they dressed at the time. I mean, this is not the way you would dress to go to a protest, right? You're gonna want something a little more comfortable, especially if you're gonna be in a violent confrontation with the police, which they were. But the white not only symbolized the idea of purity, and it also like sort of projected this sort of upper class or well put together image, but it also was a way to show the blood when they did get beaten, which they did at almost every protest. So there were all kinds of, there's a symbolic logic, there's a performance, and that's a tactic of the trickster as well, right? The idea is that you're drawing your enemy into doing something that reveals something embarrassing about themselves, something humiliating, or something that's going to force everybody to see the issue, to make the invisible visible. Sometimes, unlike in contemporary art where we're supposed to do something original, usually in this kind of practice, this traditional art practice, we're riffing on something that already happened. We're just evolving it a little bit, changing it a little bit. So here we have a group called Climate Rush in 2009, and they're dressing like suffragettes. They're referring to that history, and they would put on their costumes and do their sort of performances, lock themselves to number 10 Downing Street. And weirdly, they got climate activism on, page 3 of the tabloids. So suddenly these tabloid newspapers that were not interested at all in climate activism became interested because of the tactics they were using. Somebody like Gandhi, this is the guy, running the largest revolution in history, a democratic revolution in history. He didn't really have time to to spin his own clothes. He's making his own clothes. Why? It's a symbolic act. Again, a symbolic act that points out that power relationship and that expresses autonomy from the British government. So this is impractical, but practical in terms of its storytelling and practical in terms of the tactics of the trickster. Also, the Salt March. The Indian Revolution is full of these sort of symbolic actions. It really was fueled on symbolic actions. When I say fueled, I mean it's the stuff that got people talking and those stories that also lasted, that keep being retold about what happened. So in this case, in order to express autonomy and freedom relative to the British tax on salt, they organized marches to the sea where they evaporated seawater, made their own salt. That was illegal. And they expected a violent reaction from the police. When they didn't get a violent enough reaction with the first few marches, they actually marched on the salt works themselves where they were beaten. And with the tactics of civil disobedience, nonviolent direct action, although it's called nonviolent direct action, it usually does involve drawing upon the violence of the oppressor in order to reveal how violent they actually are. So it's nonviolent direct action where they very much went for that confrontation and did it with the visibility of the world. That's why they had embedded journalists with them, for example, from the International Herald Tribune. All right. Occupation, other tactics like this, also tactics of the trickster. This is the bonus marchers. They marched on Washington, D.C. in the 30s, camped out. Indignados in Spain, 80 years later. Rosa Parks sitting on the bus, and this is to remember that Rosa Parks, this is the simplest of gestures, right? All she's doing is not giving up her seat on a bus. And, again, this is a thing that they teach in schools in the US, but they don't teach you that there was a plan here. They just teach you that some woman just decided she had enough and decided not to give up her seat on the bus that day. What they don't generally teach you is that she actually worked for the NAACP. She was a lifelong activist, and that hundreds of people had done this action before her for over a decade, repeatedly. And this was the moment that they actually got the theater right at the right time, right? So she is cast in this role. She was working with a group of people, and they decided she was the right person because she was less threatening, middle-aged woman, coming home from work. Like, the whole story was designed to be optimized for those middle-of-the-road, sympathetic white people who might agree with it and might then sway the politics of the moment. Oh, and there's something else to mention here. Oops. So this guy sitting down behind her is actually a reporter from the United Press International, and this photo is in some ways staged. This isn't obviously the day that this happened. It's real. It really happened, but there's this question of what's real and what's not in something like this, right? So because this was planned, and because they made sure that they could get the right media, they could get the right attention, is it real or is it not real? If you have a performance by activists that's staged, but everything is real, everything checks out, it's still fact. It's just, the way in which it happens is not exactly accidental, I'll put it that way. It's theater. Here's a woman, Irene Morgan, who actually did the same action 10 years earlier when she was 17 years old. But they got it right in this case. They actually took this case to a state Supreme Court and won. As you can see here, Supreme Court vote 6-1 in the Morgan case. But it took 10 more years before the Civil Rights Act was passed, and 10 more years before the Rosa Parks case became so well known across the entire country. This was minor. This is a black newspaper, the Washington Afro-American, that was covering this. It got very little attention otherwise in the early 1950s when it happened. Other forms of protest like this one, repeating a single phrase, "I am a man." But I like to show this because it's two different modes of working here. Here we have just a big mob presenting themselves, but then sometimes the opportunity emerges to do something a little different. So when there's a show of power like this, you might be able to walk in single file and create a much more dramatic image than you'd originally had the opportunity for. Okay, I think we're almost done here with this. Yeah, this is too much to explain. Well, I'll go ahead and explain anyway. This one's fun. So, in the 60s, there were a bunch of large anti-war protests in the United States. And there was one that they were planning in, I think this is 1967, for Washington, D.C. And this group called the Yippies decided that they were going to levitate the Pentagon. Basically, everybody was going to hold hands in a giant circle. 1 million people were going to encircle the Pentagon, hold hands, and using the power of their minds, raise it off the ground. They applied for a permit to do that. Because, you needed a permit to gather, you needed a permit to protest. When they applied for the permit was rejected, because they weren't allowed to levitate the Pentagon. And of course, they publicized that. They held a press conference. We were going to levitate the Pentagon. They won't let us. I think in their first application, they asked to levitate it 100 feet or something like that, quite high. So they resubmitted the application and asked for like half the height, And every time they resubmitted the application, they made a big deal about it. The press got really excited about this story. It was really funny. They'd show up, a bunch of weird hippies asking for this thing, some of whom were lawyers too. So they followed all the right steps and eventually put the judge into a kind of, I guess what we'd call a decision dilemma, right? So either the judge had to keep denying their right to gather, to do this thing, or the judge would have to accept it. If the judge didn't accept it, though, it meant that the judge accepted that magic was possible, right? The judge had to accept that he thought that they actually could levitate the Pentagon, that it wasn't a joke. And so eventually they did get their permit to levitate the Pentagon, which happened, of course. So other things, the occupation of Alcatraz by Indians of all tribes in 1972, repeated tactics at Standing Rock and other places later on. And again, same kind of idea as you see back in with the Salt March. You're attracting a certain type of character into your drama, into your theater. These guys here, it would be so expensive. If you were doing this kind of theater, it'd be so much money to hire all these guys and get all the uniforms, all the outfits, train them to act the way they do, and hire that truck. But you know, if you can cast them into your theater, into your play for free, and they always do their job pretty much exactly as predicted. So anyway, it's working out there. Sometimes though, all the resources you have are just a few brooms. Like these are the survivors of the Bhopal catastrophe who started to use the broom as their main symbolic tool because everybody had one. You know, it was mostly a women's movement. And they could not only go and sweep and clean up, which is a good symbolic act, but they could also use the brooms to actually beat and chase around their opponents, which they did. They're quite radical, as a lot of Indian activists are, and they would run after the corrupt city official or government officials who were making compromises with Union Carbide. All right, onwards, more sculptural things, billboard alteration. I'm just going to flip through a few more slides, and actually. Yeah, I have to get to the end. Wait, bread. Let's just talk about this for a second. So why is this guy wearing bread on his head? This is... sometimes the things that you do in cases of protest are also just for your fellow activists, right? Or your fellow, let's call them artists. During the Arab Spring and the uprisings in Egypt, you know, the accusations were that for the official word from the government, the Mubarak government, was that protesters were getting violent. And protesters were, of course, saying protesters are not getting violent. It's the government that's being violent. And so they started protecting themselves by wearing strange things on their heads. And it was this absurd gesture. So taping bread to your head was one option, but you also see, if you Google like Egyptian headgear, you get a bunch of stuff like of pharaohs and tombs, and then you also get all these images from the protests in 2011 or 2012, and they show people like with bricks on their head. So things you're accused of throwing, you strap to your head as protection. So there are people walking around who could barely walk, you know, holding like giant stones on their heads as protection again. And so anyway, that was mainly like an act of solidarity for people on the ground. And so that's another role that sometimes you're playing if you're using the tactics of the trickster, because it does get tiring being part of these struggles year after year, always feeling like you're losing. If you talk to anybody who was involved in the civil rights struggle in the 60s or the 50s in the United States, or the 40s or the 30s, they always felt like they were losing. They never said, we're never like winning. There was a moment when they signed the Civil Rights Act, and then they're still losing because, you know, then we have things like Black Lives Matter. And, you know, after the aspirations of the 60s movements, moving to like fast forwarding 40 years and then having the actual tagline be Black Lives Matter. I mean, that's a really like kind of a pathetic step down from what was being asked for before, you know, which was equality. You know, it's like, oh, Black Lives Matter. Like it's sad but true. It kind of, things go forward and backward at the same time. Sometimes you just have, well, I'm not going to get into this. No. All right, so the Yes Men. What we are just doing more of the same of what we see earlier in the slideshow. We're just evolving it and changing it and meeting the emerging conditions that we see around us. And, you know, what we've had to do has gotten a little bit complicated in terms of the storytelling. And we've reached a time now that's a bit confusing with social media and how to use it and how to do things. And that's why I brought Scrubby along. This is an experiment. We've Scrubby Greenwash, who I introduced last night, who's this greenwashing sponge. And we're going to be doing something with him in about a month. And I'm enlisting help for that. So, but on that note, one of the things that's different, I think, now about making things work in a single image. Now, if you think back to Rosa Parks on the bus, that's a photograph of her sitting on the bus. It worked perfectly well at the time because anybody who is retelling that story actually was a professional, let's say a professional storyteller or a journalist, right? That photograph was meant to be accompanied by text when it went out there. It doesn't make sense on its own. You can't look at it and say, I understand what's happening in this photo. Greta here makes a simple sign, school strike for the climate. And then suddenly it makes sense in today's peer-to-peer world of social media, right? Because you can post this and it's a legible image already. And so I hate to say it, but a lot of times I feel like we need captions now for anything that we do, right? To make that single image work, sometimes you need to actually have that caption so that it can be shared between individuals without a professionally mediated or moderated storyteller in there explaining it. Anyway, so that's just the last slide. But now I have one more thing to show you before we do Q&A. Am I good for time? Have I gone on too long? Okay. So I did want to also just talk about something that I did before because it seemed like fun. So back in 1993, my first sort of big internationally visible project was called the Barbie Liberation Organization. It's over 30 years ago now, a little bit over 30 years ago. And it was, it involved switching the voice boxes of talking Barbie and G.I. Joe dolls and putting them back on store shelves all across the United States. And the reason I wanted to talk about this project is that I did a reboot of it for the 30th anniversary, and it was interesting to see the sort of the differences in what happened. But I'll show you a couple video clips of the project, and then it might be a fun one for opening some discussion. All right, so this is a clip from the original, a video I made in 1993 after the event.
We return now to the story of the Barbie Liberation Organization. Ed Daig and the news team at our affiliate in Albany, New York, had the story first.
The Barbie Liberation Organization is declaring victory in their skirmish with the toy makers. Phil Daly, who was live in our newsroom, first reported on Christmas Eve about the group's efforts to sabotage Barbie dolls and also G.I. Joes. Phil.
And on Christmas morning, the mission of the BLO was carried out by these 6-inch soldiers and a division of Barbie dolls.
The image of the American soldier, decisive, virile, and macho.
Want to go shopping?
What? G.I. Joe wants to go shopping? And that's not all.
I love school, don't you? Let's sing with the band tonight.
It was real funny.
Why?
Because it looks like, come on, fight me, except he says. I love school, don't you? Let's sing with the band tonight. The beach is the place for summer.
At first, 7-year-old Zach Zevlin thought this doll was a factory mistake, but it was soon discovered this G.I. Joe was in fact ambushed by the Barbie Liberation Organization.
Obviously opened it, and it wasn't a factory mistake.
The underground operators left behind the surgically changed doll and a...
So for the Barbie thing, it was, I actually did about 70. But then the first time that I talked to the press, I said 300. I should have said 3,000, but I didn't, you know, I came up with a number that I thought sounded like it was possible. But I mean, I didn't realize at the time that nobody would have known any different. And I was learning a lot because, you know, I mean, first of all, I was giving an answer based on how long it really did take to do the surgery, and it was actually it took a long time. Like, it'd take me a day to do each one, so it was a lot of work. But nobody knew that. It could have, you know, I could have said thousands of them. It would have been fine. It would have been a better story. There were also things I learned, like, for example, I was talking to the first newspaper or something that I talked to. They asked me what my name was, and I just used the anonymous, you know, I said, oh, we're anonymous. And they said, well, I can't publish that. And so I was like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that, so I made up a name, and then that was fine. And I just realized, that was when I realized, oh, you just have to make up a name. As long as they can say it is somebody, it doesn't matter if the person's real, but there has to be a name. So there are strange things like that. I think you're allowed to be anonymous if you have, like, state secrets or something that you're revealing. But if you're just like somebody doing something like this, it's you know, it undermines your credibility. So it was the beginning of other names and stuff. So look at that. Here we are again. So you've seen enough of this, but I'll show you the reboot. I mean, long and the short of it is that thing, the Barbie Liberation Organization, was on every major evening news show in the United States. It was also covered extensively around the world. Headlines in a lot of newspapers, all the newspapers in the United States. So at the time, it really achieved saturation in the media. So it had a tremendous amount of visibility. So it's sort of like, oh, you know, let's do a reboot of the Barbie Liberation Organization for the 30th anniversary. And this was when, you know, the Barbie movie was coming out. And it was kind of amazing how effective the Barbie movie was at erasing what's wrong with Barbie by claiming that it was a feminist, you know, toy, or by let's say layering feminism on top of it. They were able to sort of pinkwash the actual political economy behind Barbie, which is one that's using subsistence level workers, mostly women, in places like Mexico, China, Southeast Asia, people who are being subjugated and are working for extremely little money, making things that are plastic. So they're working in toxic environments, making something that is toxic and persistent and polluting the planet. So that basic thing is just being completely ignored right now. It was a very successful campaign, I think, to make people think suddenly that Barbie was a progressive toy. So I worked with, the reason that this project happened was that I went to interview Daryl Hannah, who was like a big star in the 80s, one of the biggest, and was the closest living thing to a real Barbie doll at the time. You know, she's like 6'2" and blonde hair, and even had this sort of frizzy blonde hair of the Barbie, and basically, but is, you know, not like a Barbie doll when it comes to her politics. And so I was interviewing her about it, though, because she's somebody who's been outspoken against Mattel and is, And she said, well, we have to do something right now. So we came up with a plan to attack the Mattel. And we made this video. I'll show you the video. Why not? Here we go.
Once, when I was snorkeling in one of the most remote, pristine, and protected parts of the Pacific, I found this ancient barnacle and seaweed-crusted Barbie doll. Barbie and I are about the same age, except she will never die. Really, during my lifetime, Barbie and over 1 billion of her friends have been abandoned in our landfills and waterways where they will live on forever. Unfortunately, we've all learned that plastic waste is everywhere. It's in the water we drink, the food we eat, even inside our bodies. And recycling won't fix it.
Sorry, I don't know what happened to my screen.
I am proud to announce that by 2030, all Mattel toys will be plastic-free, starting with the iconic Barbie doll. In just a few years, Barbie will be made of totally compostable materials. Mattel will also support a federal ban on all plastics in kids' toys and on single-use plastics. To mark this incredible shift, Mattel is releasing a new line of limited edition eco-warrior Barbies, commemorating the real-world heroes of the environmental struggle, with one even named after me. I've been involved in efforts to protect our natural world and her inhabitants for decades.
Stop! But why? Because it's bad for the trees. Just think of all the money we'll make. You're going downtown. Fine, take me away. I'm just fighting for the environment. High five!
I'm so excited about this new Barbie.
Really strange, right? I mean, that's weird, right? It's not in here. That's like very strange.
There are obviously some technical things here.
Yeah. No, this is something.
Barbie and this new, cleaner future for us all. Barbie can now safely return to the earth and the sea, just like all of us someday.
Okay, so we released that along with a press release from Mattel saying that they were releasing this new plastic-free Barbie. So that again, then they have a dilemma, right? Because the press is calling them, asking them if they're doing it. It's sort of and it was picked up immediately by a bunch of people because we have a major celebrity in an advertisement that looks sort of professional, who's claiming it's happening, and we also released this on a consumer-facing website, the new advertisement for Eco Warrior Barbie.
Made of mushrooms, she's the best. Eco Warrior Barbie, putting bad guys to the test. Eco Warrior Barbie.
Do you have the bolt cutters? Yeah.
She's the one who takes control.
Not there. Lock down.
Rat.
Too late. I'll file a lawsuit.
When adults are wrong, she'll do what's right.
That was a perfectly good bucket of poo.
She'll go anywhere, even France.
Daryl, Julia,
Phoebe,
Greta.
not afraid to serve.
Oh, okay. I don't.
Because Eco Warrior Barbie, corporate criminal sabotage. Eco Warrior Barbie.
Pussy Riot masks sold separately.
All right, so that's what we're going to end on. Basically, so this ended up in a bunch of newspapers as at first as a hoax, announcing that Mattel was going to release this plastic-free Barbie, and then once we revealed it, it was covered in publications like the New York Times. But as I was, I think, saying yesterday or something, it got very little. Even though it was in the New York Times and it was in a bunch of other major newspapers and a couple of television things too, it was almost like nobody had heard of it still, you know. And that's the challenge now: is how do we work with this weird, you know, kind of media landscape where basically people are consuming based on their own patterns of prior consumption. And we're all in these silos. So that's like the challenge that we're trying to figure out, I think. And maybe if somebody here knows how to do it, that's what I want to know about. So, okay, now the Q&A, because I talked too long.
Two chairs at the table.
Oh, okay. Cool. And sorry about that. That does seem like it was my computer doing something funny. It wasn't the connection. It was my actual machine acting weird. Can I sit in one of the chairs?
Yes. Do I need to use the wires, Mike?
We can have this back and forth. I like having a mic in my hand.
Utrecht creative community. Thanks, Niels, if you're around. And really, this is also a session where we hope to get you involved with any question you might have for Mike, the Yes Man, the Barbie Liberation Front. So I can kind of see you, but you really have to wave your hands. I wouldn't mind having some bit more lights on the stage, so we can see people. Yeah, maybe you ended, and you also mentioned yesterday this new media landscape that you're struggling with. Is that a right way to put it?
Yes.
In a way, it's maybe sold to us as the democratization of media that's happening. People can choose their own silos, at least that's also kind of how you refer to it. But is it really the case that people are here in charge, or?
No.
So who's in charge? Is it obviously?
It's. I mean, I think it is. It's about the algorithms that are, you know, that are feeding your feed, and you can be conscious about trying to manipulate that, you know, but you can't. Ultimately the filter is the filter that somebody else is making, and they're making it in order to monopolize your attention, because that is worth money. And until these platforms aren't advertising driven, it's going to be a corrupting factor. You're not going to, it's, and you just won't get some kinds of information. You're just going to get like, it's going to be, I mean, I actually think that the way the algorithms are really important to, I mean, these kinds of algorithms, since they're at the core, they're like a mediator in between how we communicate, and so that they should be kind of vetted and very carefully. Because, I mean, I think a lot of the polarization that we've seen in the last decade has been the direct result of social media. That's my feeling, is that it's,
being it also their business model, the
and
extreme ends of a conversation to show those, keep people's attention.
Yes.
Any questions? Two, maybe we start with on the second row. The two of you can fight over. Go ahead.
Back. Hi, thanks. One is maybe a suggestion for this exact dilemma you've just put here. Do you remember this controversy? It was last year where people were boycotting Bud Light in the U.S.
Yes, I do remember. Yes.
Yeah, and it spread through TikTok. It spread through the dissemination of different TikTokers, basically, that would target different audiences. And of course, it blew up because Bud Light didn't anticipate its main crowd to be people who were quite transphobic. So, you know, they had a trans TikToker, or a trans influencer, I guess, that completely exploded their entire marketing system. But they also had like random other people, like a footballer, you know, also advertising Bud Light to people. So that kind of focus grouping, I think, is a good way of manipulating this algorithm, you know, of just being, well, completely like morally disattached. You just hit whoever you want to hit with these different figures. Something I think about a lot. But I had an actual question about this greenwashing that it seems like you're going in the direction of now. The first Barbie clip you showed us just made me think of all of these kinds of climate promises that companies make all of the time, and you can just kind of push the goalpost every 50 years. How did Mattel respond to this plastic-free Barbie promise? You know, did they like just capitalize on it, say, yeah, we're gonna do it in 30 years, but like never actually do it? No, that didn't happen.
No, they basically made statements to the effect of no comment. Yeah, they didn't really address it and at all, and that's kind of a typical way for a savvy corporation to respond to these sorts of things. Yeah, they definitely, they didn't have a way to capitalize on it, but they also, yeah, were smart enough not to engage, I guess. Yeah. I'm curious though, I don't quite understand what you're saying about the Bud Light thing. Yeah, I'd like to know more.
I think there's this trend in marketing now where basically you'll just use influencers because they're incredibly cheap advertisement. You send them a gift basically, and you know, they get on their platform and like sell that gift to other people, that product to other people. And as a company, you don't have to really pick a moral alignment with any of these people, you know, so you can really cast a wide net in terms of who is going to see what you put out there. So if you're really into fashion, you get a fashion person that is selling you this product. Or if you're really into, I don't know, science, you get a science person that's selling you this exact same product, but they're all receiving, you know, the goods from Bud Light. Yeah. Just thinking of like getting around this algorithm, this idea that you were just saying of really trying to monopolize our attentions while also fracturing us, that one of the ways of achieving that is also just fragmenting who is putting that out there. So you had Daryl Hannah, but you also could have had Rihanna, or no, you couldn't have had Rihanna, but like, you know, something similar, more people in that regard. RuPaul, also out of your reach probably, but yeah.
Are you suggesting like how they've been using maybe the BBC, other bigger media outlets, like from the classical media outlets, that they would try and use these influencers in a way that they wouldn't even understand themselves, how they are, like you're saying, the extras, the police men, the extras in your narrative? Or are you intending to have them fully informed, cooperating to the goals of Mike and the Yes Man? Would they be aware of what they are doing? Is that your strategy or not?
I don't know. I mean that's up to the Yes Men if they choose. But I think it felt like there was a very interesting tension that was presented from this method of using news platforms over the years. And how that's kind of, you know, ramped up to a 24-hour news cycle to now there just being millions of different news outlets, not including Instagram and TikTok, where a lot of people do get their news now. And this kind of inability to really broadcast in a singular level. as opposed to these kind of like tiny podcasts everywhere. So I don't know if they have to be aware.
I mean, the thing that I've noticed about that, at least of late, is that it's actually, as opposed to being free or getting influencers to easily pick things up, it's like incredibly expensive and pay to play. And that's my understanding of that world, is that if you want an influencer to post something, you pay a lot of money to get them to post something. There are a few people, we have a handful of people who are willing to post things for us, who have a lot of followers, but they're like, they're slightly weird. They're like the Daryl Hannahs of the world. You know, they're known for that. They'll post activist content, but they're not going to cross over like a major influencer will. And so, and in that world, it's way more locked down, weirdly, than the monolithic corporate media was, because in the monolithic corporate media, they had all these journalists working for them who were interested in telling interesting stories, but didn't have a gatekeeper that was saying you need to pay for this. So because the model is different, so there was a way in still, and I feel like the world of influencing, with the exception of a few, I mean, if you have a goofy story, yeah, you can tell a goofy story in a creative way and get it covered. But for stories that have political content, it's interesting you bring up the Bud Light one, because that's one where there was a political movement that was ready to, and a hateful one that was ready to capitalize on it, and it worked for them, right? To say, oh, we're going to have this anti-trans boycott of a major beer brand. It was completely bonkers. I mean, but that it worked. It worked for something that was amplifying more hate speech, right? And a movement of people who are focusing on trans people as a problem, which, I mean, so it's, it's interesting. Like, I want to know if there's an example that we can think of that flips that says, like, all right, we love trans people and we're spreading the word using a viral social media campaign. I'm curious about that.
Maybe we jump on to the next question.
It has something to do with this. I don't believe that there is a lack of hunger for social engaged like weirdness that you do. I think it's more that it's an evolutionary disadvantage that you evolved into a completely different media landscape, and kids now, they are one with their phone. They it's just like their leg, and like somehow you need like Yes Man influencers, or like this Yes Man trickster academy could like try to make this connection with these people who are almost on a Cronenberg-esque way, like one with their with social media. That was my advice. Like I'm I'm curious about, like, there is something like activist burnout, and one of your movies also end with a sort of tiredness of, like, I think you going to Ireland to your family, or is all these pranks, you get a lot of humorous energy from them, but is there also, like, how do you deal with this tiredness, or is there a tiredness, or?
There is, and yeah, I'd say that's, the burnout thing can happen. I mean, it can happen, and then you can come back from it too. You know, it depends. And I definitely have experienced that, where you just are working on something too much and too hard for too long, and then you just get burned out, and you don't want to think about it anymore. Interestingly enough, there's a combination. If you're being effective, then sometimes that gives you more energy. You get sort of, and then there's times when you just feel like whatever you're doing isn't helping. and then you're just like, fuck, you know, you want to stop for a while. But you know, for me, I've gotten sort of re-energized recently. I mean, I think I just started having, you know, it's also who you're working with and whether you're having fun, still having fun. So it's whether you're still having fun and still being effective, but also choosing a pace that is it's not gonna kill you. But yeah, yes, activist burnout, it happens. I know a lot of people that got burned out and then either don't do it again or you go back to it. And I've come back to it and I'm having fun. Because I have walked away at times. And right now, I've definitely walked away from political work in the United States around the presidential election. I'm not doing anything there. I was doing some very traditional activism of going to people's houses and saying, you know, helping people go to vote or something, or vote early. Like, that still makes sense. But it's such a strange, people will say, why aren't you doing something about fascism in the US? And it's like, because these methods don't work for that context. If we ridicule Trump using satire or exaggeration, it's just going to be a pathetic kind of like ghost of what he's already doing. Like, he's going to say something more absurd than whatever our wildest fantasy is of what he would say, and it still goes over well with his base. And in that context, we're only talking to people that already agree with us, and we're not actually, it's that you're not creating confusion in anybody's mind. That idea in the very beginning I showed of this confusion being a valuable state and people being open to something different. And instead, that election, we're competing for like this very strange group of people who are undecided, who are in a few states. So it's a very different, I think, process, and not one that's not like anything that we do, I think, against Trump could be consumed by his kind of, I mean, I actually think, since we often use subterfuge and kind of this, these tactics, I think, don't make sense when those kinds of politics are at play. So yeah, so that's a good example of like, I used to do a lot of political work like that in dealing with, and it still can work on some level for local political races and stuff in the US, but for that presidential race right now, it's kind of, yeah, not touching it. And the same might go for like talking about right now what to do about incredibly egregious situations like what's happening in Gaza. We could work with our tactics against companies in the US that are, creating, against politicians who are supporting Israel, and we could work with companies that are building the weapons. So there's tactics, but we're not going to directly engage with that issue. Instead, we'll just go we'll use other tactics. We're not going to use these sorts of tactics for that, except for eroding the pillars of support for that, for genocide. Yeah, it's also recognizing that these types of things are for certain contexts. They don't work in other contexts. And, it's also part of, it ties into the burnout thing. It's like, when do you also feel like, fuck, it's just too much, and, can't do anymore. But we don't want to get too depressed, because then it becomes impossible.
When you see such a costume again, then the fire starts burning again.
Right, exactly. Speaking of which,
meanwhile, I see there's a hand over there. Think of your questions while Mike is doing.
Yeah, I'm just getting my bag so I can get Scrubby's little green book out.
I had a green book. I think there was a question on the second row. No,
I can
the girl next to you.
Hello.
You had a question, correct?
Sorry?
You had a question?
I had a remark. Hi, Mike. My name is Krista from the Clean Clothes Campaign. Hello.
Oh, hey. Oh, hi.
And the Clean Clothes Campaign had
thank you
two
for
brilliant
identifying yourself.
actions with the Yes Man in 23, targeting Adidas to pay, to sign the Pay Your Workers agreement. I really do hope that the Yes Man will continue his brilliant work. One of the actions was indeed in a hoax that the by then new CEO of Adidas appointed a former garment worker from Cambodia as a co-CEO, and her first thing to do was indeed signing the Pay Your Workers agreement, which is an agreement developed by trade unions all over the world, and proposing a global severance guarantee fund to pay out workers their severance that they are legally owed when they are laid off, because we saw during COVID, because brands started to cancel and reduce their orders, that numerous factories closed, leaving workers jobless, without income, being paid their wages and severance payment. Well, we were very glad. These two actions with the Yes Men were brilliant. But despite these actions and another actions all over the world took place, from Indonesia to Pakistan, and there were speeches during the shareholders meeting from Adidas. Despite all these actions, Adidas still doesn't take responsibility for the labor rights for the workers in their supply chains. So indeed, activism needs to continue. And I brought some flyers for everyone, so please take one. So there you can find some more information on how to support a campaign to sign to Adidas to take responsibility for their workers in the supply chains. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, how many people were here last night and saw the, just trying to, so some of you didn't see it. Okay, cool. Ah, yes. Yeah, I'll bring something up on screen. I'll go and I'll pull up the, here.
For those who were not there, I don't know if you mentioned, Mike, but scrubby greenwash is supposed to become an emoji. Is that already accepted, or that's your campaign to get him accepted as an emoji on my iPhone? Which also makes me think, why not? I mean, there's many emojis on your iPhone that have a second meaning, often activistic, like a watermelon being an example clearly now. Is there an existing emoji, Mike, that could become scrubby greenwash?
No, there's no. We are. There are no existing emojis that could become scrubby greenwash. Okay, so just to no. Okay, first of all, I'll finish with this first. So, yeah, working with the Clean Clothes Campaign, and we almost always work with an organization like the Clean Clothes Campaign. We did this action here. Where we held a fashion show as Adidas, introducing their new line of reality wear, which owned the reality of the abuses that Adidas had been carrying out against their workforce in places like Cambodia, where they had not paid and still haven't paid workers that were let go and were suspended and sometimes just worked without pay during the pandemic. So anyway, this was a series of fake press releases that announced that they were going to compensate the workers, appoint a co-CEO. So there's two modes here. One is this utopian announcement. What is the best thing that Adidas could do? If they were to meet the demands of the workers, what would that look like? And so we said they were going to pay back the workers, and we took it a step further by saying, how would they safeguard this? Well, if they put somebody from the factory floor into the position of being co-CEO to look after their ethics throughout their supply chain, that would safeguard that for the future. So we made a utopian announcement acting in that register. But at the same time, we couldn't resist doing something that was let's say, darkly humorous. And so that's why we also had this suffering forward fashion that we introduced and Berlin Fashion Week for a whole bunch of influencers, actually. Speaking of influencers, we had all these fashion influencers who came in who were actually expecting an Adidas fashion show, who watched this kind of strange, show of bruised and battered models wearing these torn clothes that were designed by actually Threads and Tits, a progressive pair of fashion designers from Berlin. So we collaborated with them on this, yeah.
How do you make sure that Adidas doesn't notice we're planning on this?
Yeah, there's no way to make sure of that, but we try to, keep it under wraps, keep it secret until we're making the announcement. So, when we sent out a fake press release as Adidas, there's a lot of layers that need to be there to make it look real, right? So there's the fake website, but also how you register it is important. Who is registering it. We usually have also a fake, Twitter account and all the fake social media accounts. It's actually a lot of work because you have to have all these layers of fake stuff in order to make it look more real and to get a few journalists to cover it initially so that others can make fun of them, because that's these days what we've noticed is that journalists are willing to pile on. We've had editors tell us this. They'll be like, well, we're not going to do a story on this until somebody else picks it up as fake. And we're like, even if there's a room full of influencers, for example, who are all being fooled, like, right, the top fashion influencers from Germany and a bunch of top ones from Europe and globally are there in the room. They're getting fooled by this fashion show. The journalists are there and they can interview them and they know what's happening. They still won't cover it. Their editor won't cover the story unless some other major media outlet falls for it. We're just like, this is fucking nuts, but it's the way that it's working now. It's sort of like they make a decision about what's newsworthy or not.
But maybe it's also the backlash of fake news, which, is spreading a lot. In a way, what you're doing is spreading fake news with then the second step of revealing it and then pushing your message. Yep. But maybe this fear of being part of a fake news spreading event is keeping journalists extra careful. I'm not taking this step until I see other people's taking.
Yep.
How do you deal with that? Well, another element of this new media landscape that we have already mentioned.
How do we deal with fake news, or with
with journalists maybe being wary because they have to deal with fake news?
Oh yeah, it's obviously like it's, I don't know. We never intend to actually fool journalists. That's not the goal of any of this. It's like sometimes one journalist has to be fooled in order for others to carry the story, and that's unfortunate, actually. But how do we? The rise of so-called fake news is really complicated for us. It's obviously made it a little more difficult. It's made it more difficult. It's not really that it's more difficult to make fake news or to get people to pick up fake news. It is a little bit more difficult, but the issue is really like how people perceive fake news now and what it means and how offended people are about the fakeness, which is kind of a strange thing anyway, because the news has always been fake to some degree, and like, honestly, like we have this, it's the PR industry is making in the United States over half of the news anyway. It's just bullshit that's generated to sell something, right? So we have news, local television news. There'll be a story about a new nano paint, some kind, or socks I'm just using this, nanoparticles, like some new thing. And you're like, why is this news? It's news because somebody paid for it. Somebody has created content that is then easy to be repackaged and is like, can fill the airtime and sell the commercials, So there's all this bullshit out there already. And there's nothing different about it now, except that now we're calling it fake news. and it's a big, it's like this big, it's become a big deal. So yeah, it makes things more complicated, but it's not a new thing. So
we're getting to the end, maybe.
Oh wait,
I think
okay.
maybe there was a question over there, and then maybe one last question if anyone.
Yeah.
would add.
Okay, wait. I'm going to also circulate this book. So, in the interest of trying to figure out what to do with this question about social media and stuff, we're forming a small posse. I called it an army yesterday, but I had to cross that out. This green book is Scrubby's very secret book of Scrubby's posse. And if you write your email address down in here, you'll get a communication from me about things that we would try to do in the near future regarding Scrubby here and promoting Scrubby around the Scrubby is going to be a representative of a major corporation, and this is part of a campaign that we're doing against liquefied natural gas. It's complicated. I'm not going to explain it right now. Because it's complicated, it might not work, but we're going to try it anyway because we have this really cute, very sad, slimy green sponge. And so I'm going to hand this around. If you can sign up, you'll get some emails from me between now and December 15th when we're going to do the launch of Scrubby Greenwash, the greenwashing emoji. Let me find this. He already has an Instagram. Oh yeah. So you can see here that Scrubby is already out there, has been around in New York. People like Tom Cruise are talking about him. Yeah, it's lonely sometimes liking stuff that other people don't like, methane, but don't let anybody yuck your yum. So this is the kind of character that Scrubby Greenwash is. A big promoter of methane and anyway, so we got a little bit of a social media profile started. It will be revealed what he's really all about later, but with your help, hopefully. But it's just getting a little preview. The reason why he has a hole in his mouth there, I don't know if anybody's wondering, but that's so that he can smoke. In case you're wondering. So if anybody has like a spare like cigarette or cigar, I think he prefers menthols. Yeah, there you go. Details.
Let's take a few last questions.
I was wondering, it would seem to me that online things like irony, over-exaggeration, and so forth are far more part of the media landscape than in more traditional media. That wouldn't be an assumption. And I was wondering if that is so, if you share this assumption, would that make it easier or harder to get something like this on a global attention level or something? So, yeah.
That's interesting. I don't know the answer to that. I really don't know. I mean, the thing is, there is actually like also a tremendous amount of really good stuff on, TikTok and like amazing videos and a lot of people who are insightful and critical and doing like really incredible work. But it's that type of thing where it's going to be seen by a certain segment of the population, and it's kind of let's call it a self-selecting group. So it ends up, I don't know, but as far as like people who are whether it's indulging the irony or not, I don't know. I mean, it is interesting. Like TikTok's algorithms are also, they do tend to be to favor things that are not political, that are less political. They're trying to steer people away from political speech. And so that's something that's the interesting thing about it, I think, overall, is that we have this idea that these platforms are free, but they're actually carefully controlled, driven by profit motive, and then driven by other motives too that tie in ways with the profit motive. So it's like the placement of products is easy. You can take your product. You can target people, target specific market sectors. It's like the reason why Barbie now, there's a million different Barbies. You can get a Barbie that is any race and has any disability or whatever, and then they're able to sell it directly to the people who feel like that reflects them, because you know who they are. So there's that kind of component of it where it's great for selling things, but I don't know if like as far as the self-selecting group of people who enjoy irony, it knows that if you like irony because you've been watching a bunch of ironic stuff, but I don't know if that means that they know that you're also maybe less susceptible to the suggestibility of like normal advertising. I mean, there are these really big questions that come up, and I don't know the answer. So if anybody does, let's hear it. Yeah.
How was the guy behind you doing it, if you don't mind?
Thank you. I would like to ask you about your inspiration for making the work that you do using this method of over-identification, which kind of appeared in the 90s or late 80s. I want to, just curious to hear who were your role models and how did you come to working in this way with media and manipulation and things like that?
Yeah, good question. There were a whole bunch of people who were doing these sort of media pranks and stuff, in the 80s and 70s, 60s, 50s. People like Alan Abel, it was a media prankster in the 50s and 60s. Joey Skaggs doing stuff in the 70s. And then looking at political activists. The thing is, a lot of what I was doing here originally just came out of, I think it was really actually naive. You don't really know, you don't have direct inspirations. You're more like doing stuff, and then you find out about other stuff, and then it's sort of like snowballs. So you can't say, I looked at this thing, and then I started doing this. It's more like I started doing these weird things, like with friends in high school, because we were growing up in the suburbs, and there was this uniformity of of culture and corporate culture that was invading they were building these suburbs and building these chain stores and malls, and there was nothing to do, except for go to the mall. That's the way it felt. It was just this vacant space, in a corporate world that was growing up around us. And confronted with that, if you're rebelling against something, you start rebelling against the brands. You start, doing these things like we go to McDonald's or go to you dress up as Ronald McDonald's and go to McDonald's and demand a free hamburger things like that. And we just started doing that stuff because it was what else is there to do?
For those who like pranks like that, tonight we have a video called The Real Snow White, and it's an actress, or artist I should say, dressed up like Snow White, trying to get into Disneyland, Europe, which is not allowed. You can't get into Disneyland dressed up as Snow White. So
yeah, but you can get into Disneyland other ways. I can tell you about that.
Once you're in, then you put on your clothes. Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, actually, it depends. Disneyland and Disney World are different.
Oh.
Disneyland, they do chase you. There's a hall fence, so you have to be pretty athletic. Climb the fence, and then you have to run because they're going to be chasing you. There's sensors all everywhere. Disney World is different. Once you're in there, they even if you identify yourself as somebody who broke in, they don't know what to do with you. They're just I once
You're
had
talking from experience.
Yes, I once had a past life. I decided that it would be fun to discover what the limits of fun were by breaking into those theme parks. And so I went to places like, tried delivering a pizza, like you do the things, to see what works for getting in. Penetration testing, they call it, only it's not digital. It's just, you're just like, what works to get into Disney World or Disneyland? And then I published a weird little thing in a research magazine, like a zine, that was called The Limits of Fun. And it was about how to, and it was just also at the time I was I was thinking a lot about ecotourism and about, there was extreme sports, the emergence of extreme sports in the late 80s, early 90s, and the idea of ecotourism. And I thought we can combine these in something where you don't have to leave wherever you are, your local area. There's always an opportunity to do something that's both like an extreme sport and ecotourism. It's just like by breaking into things like that.
Mike, you'll be around for 2 more sessions. We have a coffee break. People can talk more to you in the coffee break. There's the panel, It's the Media Stupid, that you're one of the members of. And then for everyone here interested in one of the 3 films, the feature-length films, documentaries that the Yes Men have made, the Yes Men Fix the World, that will be screened. It's all in this little nice orange folder that we're having. We have to wrap up now. Thanks a lot.
Before you go,
yeah,
Clean Clothes Campaign. You have stuff to hand out, right? Can you go over there by the door and hand stuff to people on the way out? Thank you. Okay.
How was this campaign financed?
Dominique, we have to round up. So you can
need
ask
to
that
tell us
question
that.
in the bar. So everyone, welcome. Thanks a lot. Dominique and Steve, welcome.
Thank you very much.